Good morning and welcome to this special edition of All Things Aviation and Aerospace. I'm Vince Mickens with Private Air Media. Today's show is going to be somewhat of a departure from what we usually do in promoting opportunities that are available in our industry for young people to consider and for parents to know about. I will say this though, with the two guests that we have on and their backgrounds and the extent of what they've done in their careers, it would be inspiring for anybody that would be listening or watching the show. So it's really still going to accomplish a little bit of what I normally do with this show anyhow. But instead, we're going to talk about the upcoming Air Charter Summit that is being hosted by the National Air Transportation Association, NATA, taking place right here in Washington, D.C., the Washington, D.C. area at the Gaylord National Resort and Convention Center at National Harbor. Joining me for this special preview edition is my guest co-host from NATA, Jillian Williams. Jillian manages conference and events for the National Air Transportation Association, again, NATA. Jillian, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Vince.
It's great to have you co-hosting it with me, especially since you work for NATA and you guys have a really important summit coming up in a few weeks. So looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, so am I. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Jillian, as you know, I've been in the industry for a long time, but I have to say that during our pre-show preparation, I was actually kind of blown away, quite frankly, impressed by both the growth and evolution of the air charter industry, and believe that this is a very timely summit for NATA to be doing. Thankfully, we have two very knowledgeable gentlemen joining us today, as I mentioned earlier, who, in addition to giving us clarity about what is taking place in the air charter industry, will also provide a thorough preview of what to expect at the upcoming summit in a couple of weeks on June 21st and June 22nd. So let's get started by first introducing our guest. Jillian?
All right, Vince, thank you. I'd like to welcome my NATA colleague, Alan Stevens. Alan is the Vice President of Regulatory Affairs for NATA. And prior to that, Alan has served in several key leadership positions at the FAA, including Acting Deputy Director for the Flight Standards Office of Air Charter Safety Assurance. He also served in the Tennessee Air National Guard for over 3 decades, with a list of roles and deserving accolades that would probably take up the entire show. Alan is also a graduate of Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. Alan, thank you so much for joining us today. We are very much looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Jillian.
Yeah, welcome to the show, Alan. Also joining us today is attorney David Norton. David is a partner and head of the aviation practice for the law firm of Shackelford, Bowen, McKinley, and Norton in Dallas, Texas. He is a United States Air Force Academy graduate, received his MBA from Louisiana Tech University and his JD, cum laude, from Southern Methodist University. I get all the stuff out of my mouth. I'd be real good. Sorry about that, David. David also has a very distinguished list of accomplishments that could fill yet another show in its entirety. He was an Air Force pilot who still flies as a civilian pilot with a bunch of certificates, including a type rating in a DC-10. Thought that was really kind of cool. Currently, he flies one of my favorite aircraft, the Cessna Cardinal 177B, for those who have to be exact. But the Cardinal's a pretty smooth aircraft, and I think it's pretty neat that he has one and flies it. Gentlemen, welcome to All Things Aviation and Aerospace.
Thank you so much. I'm absolutely delighted and honored to be included.
Me as well. Thank you,
we
Vince.
are very much delighted to have you guys here and Jillian, for you to help me co-host this so we can really talk about what's going to be, I think, a very important and very insightful Air Charter Summit that you guys have come up. We have a lot of ground to cover. But before we dive in, I thought it would be helpful to give a brief overview about NATA, the National Air Transportation Association, and what it does. Jillian?
Well, thank you, Vince. I would like to just first start off by providing everyone with NATA's mission statement, which is empowering our members to be safe and successful aviation businesses. We are also the leading national association representing the business interests of general aviation service companies on both the legislative and regulatory matters at the federal level. And we also provide education services and benefits to our members to help ensure their long-term economic success.
Thank you, Jillian. Alan, why don't we go ahead and start out by kind of sharing who the speakers are going to be. You're going to have some really great speakers at this summit. And you tell us a little bit about them and about what the summit is going to do.
Sure. And thank you, Vince. I will tell you the first keynote speaker that I would like to introduce is Miss Carol Annie Petzonk, who is the Assistant Secretary of the DOT for Aviation. And Miss Petzonk is going to join us first thing in the morning and kind of kick the whole show off with a look at DOT and what the future holds for the DOT in aviation. I believe that this is going to be really exciting for the folks to sit in and listen how she sees those things, to really learn about where DOT is heading. And she's been at the forefront of many efforts, especially around advanced air mobility and such as that. We also have with her in that particular session is going to be Kurt Castagna. And Kurt is our CEO of NATA. He also is very active in California, the Van Nuys area. I could go on and list many of the things that he has done as well. The two of them are going to have more of a fireside chat, just really talking about what's going on in the future of aviation, especially around the DOT programs with it. From that, we're going to move into and work with Ms. Shanetta Griffin, who is the Associate Administrator in the FAA for airports. And one of the things that we really want to zero in with her expertise is to talk about what's going on in the infrastructure piece with airports, especially as it relates to charter operations and what the future holds for those charter operations around advanced air mobility. So that's one of the things there. Now, we also are working to get either Mr. Bolter, AVS1, who is Aviation Safety Associate Administrator for the FAA, or his deputy, which is Jody Baker. And we are going to be confirming that this week, which are the two of them. But what we want from them is the aviation safety side of that same conversation with Ms. Shanetta Griffin around airports. So we see that as a very dynamic discussion. So from the operational side to the infrastructure side, and how do those two pieces fit together for the future? Rolling right out of that into that session, we're going to be talking with Ms. Caitlin Locke. Now, Caitlin is the Deputy Executive Director for Flight Standards. And what we want to do with Caitlin and her co-guest, or the guest that's going to be with her, is Anthony Schneider. Tony Schneider is head of what they call AOV in in aviation safety. And what they do and what his main role is to provide oversight of air traffic organization. And a lot of people really have maybe a little confusion around who provides that oversight and how is that done internal into the FAA. And Tony will bring a lot of insight for people and give them the ability to ask a lot of questions around that. So straight out of that session, we're going to, of course, we'll have some lunch and that type of thing, and hopefully get our bellies full. But the next thing that we're going to talk about are three different topic areas, and we're going to have guests there to speak to those. One of those is about illegal charter. And what is it about illegal charter that makes it a charter illegal? What is it about those things? What is the FAA doing to try to prevent those illegal charters from happening to begin with. And that's going to be Mr. Paul D'Allura, and his co-worker is Mr. Don Riley. And they're both out of the Special Enforcement Investigation Team and what they call a Safe Air Charter Committee. So they've been working hard around the world, actually, to brief and educate people on what constitutes an illegal charter and to try to minimize and mitigate those activities. Along with that particular session is information around safety management systems. Now, one of the things we won't be able to do is to really pull apart the new rule and talk it in depth because it is still being adjudicated. And while that's being done, we can't really go into that, or at least the FAA cannot. What we can do, though, is talk about a topic that I think most of our members had addressed during some webinars we had earlier this year to try to figure out what was the biggest interest areas. One of those was scalability of a safety management system. So we're going to have Mr. Dale Whitmore out of the SMS program office from Flight Standards, who will be sharing with us information about that. We'll roll right out of that particular session. We're going to have Ms. Karen Huggard, who is our VP of Government Affairs here at National Air Transportation Association. And she's going to be talking about what we're trying to accomplish in the FAA Reauthorization bill, to what are our primary interests, what are we trying to get accomplished there. And I believe what you will be able to see and hear are those things that you will be able to then take away and understand how we're going to try to accomplish some of the improvements in the government service there. A couple other things I wanted to share with you is the session that we're going to have on illegal charter, which is Mr. David Norton, Mr. Paul Lang, and Ms. Eileen Gleimer are going to be there. And I'll tell you what, let me pause there. And David, would you like to talk a little bit about that particular session, since you're really closer to that?
Yeah, and I'd be happy to. So we're going to talk about public charters. Public charter is it's a term of art. It's a regulated concept. It's found in 14 CFR Part 380. That means it's a DOT economic regulation. The reason it's become of some interest is the rule has been around for a long time, but not very many people took advantage of it. It was pretty arcane. However, with the advent of, I think, two things. One is just the explosion in the charter market and the use of private aviation, and with the increases in technology that are on the horizon with AAM and UAS, Part 3 has become a very attractive or growing segment. There's some, I don't want to say controversy. I mean, there's some very interesting discussions that have been going on about that. So the whole idea of this panel will be to talk a little bit about where public charter comes from, what it really means, how you get into it, some of the pluses and minuses of doing it, and perhaps where it's headed.
Excellent. Thank you, David. And then our last session of the day is going to go into advanced air mobility. And advanced air mobility is a very wide open, it is almost, it kind of reminds me of many stories I've heard about the Wild West. There's a lot of conversation, there's a lot of interest, there's a lot of money. There's what are we going to do about infrastructure? What are we going to do about operational side? So we're going to have Megan Eisenstein, who is our Managing Director of Industry Affairs and Innovation, and she's going to lead a panel. And the panel members on that are going to be, and give me just a moment, one of them is John, and I'm going to mess up the last name, Crisis, Head of Mobility Operations at Over Air. And another person that we're going to have there as well is going to be, and I'm flipping through these, and I apologize that I did not have that up. But the next person is Mr. Nate Ward, Head of Network Development for Beta Technologies. So we're going to have two very important guests in the advanced air mobility world, and Megan is going to work with them to ask those kinds of questions of what we've heard about with the charter operations through the day. How does that going to look for the future, and how does advanced air mobility fit into that picture, both from the infrastructure side and the operations side? So as you can see, it is going to be an extremely busy day. So, Finch,
actually,
Alan. There's just one more speaker that you left off of the final one, Ryan Nauru with Joby Aviation. He is the Senior Government Affairs Specialist. He will also be joining that AAM panel.
And now you know why we have Jillian here, because Jillian keeps us all straight.
Exactly. I was just going to say that the one thing that really stands out to me and has stood out to me in our conversation about this upcoming summit is public charter and what that really means and the different aspects of it. So Alan and David, can you guys kind of expand on that and particularly with what you're going to cover and talk about that during the summit?
Well, how about we do this first? David, if you don't mind, let me toss it over to you and let you just kind of walk the audience through what it is, what it's not, and kind of some of the parameters. And then I'll share a little bit about what we want to talk about through the day with that.
Okay, no, that'd be great. I'd be happy to do that. So yeah, just to expand a little bit on my kind of introduction to it. In the aviation world, as you're out there flying around, it can be sliced and diced in many different ways, but one way to parse out all your responsibilities are on the regulatory side are the FAA, which governs safety ideas, the safe operation of the aircraft, and the Department of Transportation, Office of the Secretary of Transportation, who oversees and governs the economic aspects of aviation. If you're flying around as a private operator, you have very little interface with the DOT, but the moment you're paying for a seat on an airplane, the government is very concerned that you are protected from a consumer protection perspective. The FAA is concerned about safety of all flights. DOT is primarily concerned where you as a consumer are coming in and you're buying a seat on an airplane. So, when you're flying on any of the major Part 121 carriers, for example, and there is any type of delay in service or they bump you off a flight or so forth, there are very strict rules on making sure that there's the economic ability to refund you or take care of you if that flight's gone away. To be a major air carrier, the way that the Department of Transportation ensures that happens is they make an air carrier or Part 121 air carrier go through what's called a fitness finding. A fitness finding is, hey, we're going to monitor you. We're going to make sure that you have a big enough of a business and so forth so that there's economic viability there to take care of you. When you're flying around Part 135, there is no such thing as a fitness finding. There's some very basic DOT requirements. You have to be able to show that you're properly insured, and you have to meet some of the other certification rules, but there's no fitness finding. Why does that work that way? Well, because generally speaking, for 135, when when I go buy a seat on American or United or Delta or any of the big carriers, I'm buying on a seat basis. The air carrier is responsible to collecting all that money and be able to refund me if they need me. When I charter an aircraft, Part 135, I'm chartering the entire capacity of the aircraft. I'm generally paying for it up front. I have a one-on-one relationship with that charter operator if it's working correctly. And if the flight doesn't go, the DOT is comfortable enough that there's going to be the financial ability to get the money back. Part 380 kind of fills a niche. It was created to allow for the sale of a single seat on an aircraft, but then have the flight conducted by a Part 135 operator who has not gone through a fitness finding. So how does DOT protect the economic interests of the person who's bought that one seat? And Part 380 spells out a mechanism to be able to place the money into an escrow account there are a couple different ways that the carrier can do that. There's a party called the public charter operator who collects the money, has to place it into an escrow account. And then based on that, that public charter operator hires the charter company. As far as the charter company is concerned, they're still selling the full capacity of their plane. It's the public charter operator that gets to sell single seats. But the only reason they do that is because they don't get to collect your money and keep it before the flight. It has to go into an escrow account. If the flight doesn't make, the money comes back. If the flight's conducted, then the money's released to the parties. That's how Part 380 works. So that's actually been part of the issue with Part 380 is those economic requirements, having the right escrow account, having a bank that understands it and is willing to work with you on setting that all up, or having a security bond or surety bond, having the financial instruments in place. That has been difficult. More and more companies are figuring that out. They're figuring out how to make it work. And that's becoming a growing industry now where, I can sit, it used to be, I love snow skiing. I live in Dallas. I love snow skiing. I love going to Taos, New Mexico. There's no easy way to get from Dallas to Taos, New Mexico. You're either going to fly to Albuquerque and drive, or you got to drive. And a couple of years ago, they started using a Part 380 public charter operator. And it's amazing because now I can get to Dallas to Taos, New Mexico in about an hour and a half. It just blows us away. That's a vehicle that would not be able to be done through a 121 carrier because there's not enough volume to warrant putting scheduled service in. At the same time, there aren't very many people that can have the financial wherewithal to charter an airplane by themselves to go to Taos. But there's a fair number of people that can pay a little bit more maybe than you would have paid for a 121 ticket, but you only are buying a seat. I think that's a really good example of a niche market that our 380 fills. It gives some additional opportunity, gives more flying capability to the flying public because it's a new offer. It's an expanded offering, and at the same time, it creates it creates more jobs in the aviation industry.
So David, as
summary of 380.
Yeah, and I was going to say, as the airlines pull back on some of the smaller regional airports, this opens up opportunities to still be able to go to those airports while they're doing that.
That's exactly right. That's actually one of the niches that 380 is filling, and that there are some communities that are now that as they learn about 380, they're very interested in trying to entice that activity into their community because it does create a semi-scheduled program opportunity for their citizens.
Yeah, Alan.
And so what you heard there was the background and kind of the overview of what Part 380 is. And you'll hear people like myself and David talk a lot about a part and that type of thing. For the audience, for the purpose of the listeners, I'd like to just quickly say that when we use the word part, we're talking about a part of the actual Code of Federal Regulations or the codified federal regulations. Now, those in aviation, we divide them up into parts, and we'll talk about Part 121, which deals with like your Delta Airlines, your Southwest and JetBlue and so forth. Part 135 that deals with people that you can go hire a particular charter flight from. And if you specifically want to do that yourself, it's just like David had described. Part 91, like Vince was talking about, just going up and maybe I just want to go to Lambert's and get a throat roll or something, and I just want to eat some lunch. Those are the kinds of operations that are done. And then, okay, so how did Part 380 fit into all of this? And that part describes the mechanisms that David was talking about to ensure that people are not, their money is not separated from them without relief. And that's where the government, like David had described, is very interested in that. So what, and who cares, and how are we going to tie all this into the actual event at the Air Charter Summit? So one of the things that I learned very quickly when I came into this role back in October of last year was that we had not conducted an Air Charter Summit since 2014. So kind of digging into that a little bit. Well, why not? And there's many factors and different things that went on. But what we also learned is there are some key things that are going on in the industry, safety management systems, other things like that. But Part 380 is a very integral part of how the industry operates today. And it is one of those things that's not well understood. So what we wanted to do was throughout the day, we want to talk about the future. Yes, we want to talk about how our members and our people are actually doing in the industry. But we also want to take some time to really pull apart the mechanism that makes up public charter operations. And so many of the questions that we'll be asking our guests through the day as we get into some of the topics are going to be centered around public charter operations. What do they see as the future for that? There may be some things they can share. There may be some things that they can't share because of cases or things in front of them as a government agency, but they'll share that with us as we go through the day. But the takeaway for the people who attend the Charter Summit is going to be a much better understanding of what public charter operations are, what they're not, and is this a business opportunity for them to be able to get into and actually succeed with. So that's one of the things that we really want to delve into and make sure that as people walk away from that summit, we want to make sure that the outcome is a good, strong understanding of that and whether or not they do want to get into that. So Vince, I hope that answered where you were wanting to go.
It does, and that's a really great summation. And David, you gave great insight also about public charter. I think the other thing that stands out as a kind of a neon flashing flag for me is the term illegal charter, and what that all entails, and how that's being combated, if you will, et cetera. So I'd love to hear from both of you about that.
Well, let me take the first stab at this, David, if that works for you. So the first thing I'd like to share with our audience is that illegal charter has been around since charter days have been around. Okay. Yeah. There's always going to be someone who does something in a way that is not in alignment with all of the rules that go with it. Why are the rules there? The regulations, as when I was being taught at the FAA Academy, when I went through back in 2003, one of the key things they said is the regulations are written in blood. Well, why is that? Well, all of the accidents, you can go all the way back to the very first jetliner accident or to the very first accident there ever was, which is actually in the archives. It was Selfridge, who was killed because of an experimental prop. And I believe it was Wilbur Wright that actually survived that crash, and the other gentleman passed away. But ever since that day, when that happened, we've learned from our errors and our mistakes, and those are written into the actual federal regulations. Those are the minimum standards. That's minimum. That's the absolute bare minimum that you can do to ensure that your operation is safe. And when you're carrying other passengers and you're asking them to pay you, you need to do everything within your power to ensure that that operation is conducted in a safe manner. So back to illegal charter. What is that? I mean, what's going on here? Right. There are those particular people out there who might try to cut around the rules a little bit for advantage. So you might hear things like, hey, down the street, it may cost you X, but I can get that in half, or I can get that a fourth of what it may cost over there.
Red flag.
The red flag. The very first red flag is, I can do it for so much cheaper. And so what has been going on in the FAA is they have recognized this as an issue. They have a special enforcement investigation team who goes in and investigates these types of events. And they're also working on the education piece, which is to educate people who would ride and to pay for a charter, to help them understand which ones are legal and which ones are not. And so that's the reason why that is such a particular area of interest, especially for our members who have to abide by the rules and play it by the way it's written down, which, by the way, to do it right and to ensure it's done right costs money. And they have to pass that along to the paying passenger. So that's one of the reasons why it's such of an interest. So, David, let me kick it over to you, sir.
Yeah, that was great. That was a great. So I agree with everything Alan said. That's a great synopsis. So, kind of where to just continue to flesh that out some more. And I've been a member of NATA for many years. I've been on the Air Charter Committee, and several years ago we created an illegal air charter subcommittee. And why was that? Well, as Alan indicated, I mean, NATA is a great, big part of its membership constituency are certified air charter operators, Part 135 operators that are out there providing air charter services. A really important segment of the aviation industry. 135 has always been a little bit of the redheaded stepchild in the aviation world. For good reasons, FAA pays a lot of attention to Part 121, perhaps a little bit less to 135. And I've seen over the 25 years of doing this that their interest in 135 kind of comes and goes, and it depends on what's going on and so forth. Well, in the 2006 timeframe, there was an accident that really drew a lot of attention. There was some greater definition and so forth of how to do it right. And then interest kind of waned again a little bit. But starting after the Great Recession, there were a lot of airplanes sitting around, a lot of owners with airplanes that weren't flying very much, and they were looking for ways to try and mitigate some of their costs. I'm giving you anecdotal evidence here. So there started to be there was a noticeable and significant increase in the use of what are called aircraft dry leases. That doesn't actually have anything to do with fuel per se. It's more a question of who's providing the pilots, who's operating the aircraft. And there was an increase in dry leasing that should have been done as wet leases, that should have been conducted under a 135 certificate. There were also instances where a very few, a small number, but some charter operators, certificated operators, were cutting corners themselves and doing things that perhaps they shouldn't have been. And it became very noticeable in the industry. There were a lot of safety concerns. On the one hand, people that are paying money to get on an airplane, they should have all the protections afforded to a commercial operation. Like Alan said, that safety is the main thing. If you're paying for the money, then you ought to have some confidence that operation is being looked at and so forth. Conversely, if you're out flying yourself around, if I'm flying my little Cardinal around, or I'm flying my CJ3 or whatever, and I'm not carrying paying passengers, I'm doing it myself, you ought to be able to do that and be in the system without having to comply with all the additional rules that apply to commercial operations. So there's this big delineation. So that had become a bigger issue. NATA became very concerned for its membership because it's really unfair for a charter operator who's doing it right and spending the money to do it right, having somebody down Hangar Row who's offering essentially the same service at half the price because they're doing it, it's called 134 and a half. I got everything but the certificate, right? So, they're basically doing charter without all the overhead that's required to do charter. And at the same time, you want to be fair to the customers that they're safe, but you also want to be able to delineate so that people that are flying under Part 91, as Alan referenced earlier, that's done correctly. So I remember sitting at a table there, some members of the illegal air charter subcommittee sat headquarters FAA back in the I don't remember the exact year, it was 2015, 2016 timeframe, where we asked to meet with them. And we were very actually happy. The Special Emphasis Investigation Team was part of the meeting, see it. And so the FAA indicated that, they had been paying attention to this. So there was very much a concerted effort to say, hey, let's focus on this and let's get a big educational effort out there. So NATA was right at the pointy edge of the spear as far as working with CIT and other officers within the FAA to really mount a big educational effort. And so there were a couple of us were going around the country having a lot of fun briefing operators, owners, so forth and so on. We did a couple of Zoom type programs that were made available. They're still available on the FAA website Alan, the NATA kind of helped resuscitate the illegal charter hotline, and Alan very wisely the FAA wasn't really doing that right. NATA kind of poked him and got him to do it again, and then they've transferred it back to the FAA because that's really where that should be. And Alan can talk about that. But that's been a big tool because that we know that a lot of people have actually used that, and it's increased the dialogue. Now, COVID kind of slowed things down a little bit between educational efforts and enforcement efforts. I can tell you from my private practice standpoint, it's come back with a roar. So there's a lot of special emphasis and enforcement activity going on. And that's as a general rule, we want, if you're paying for the flight, you ought to be able to meet the expectation. So illegal charter's been it's a combination of some folks that aren't doing it right, but there's a lot of dry leasing that's going on. That has been the focus of the industry. So, I don't know, Alan, do you want to add anything back onto that, or does that all make sense?
Yeah, and I was going to ask Alan to actually, if you delve into the FAA side of it, you've spent a lot of time at the FAA, and there are a lot of things that the FAA is doing in that direction. So, can you give us some perspective on that?
I sure can. And so let me do this very quickly. So in flight standards, which is one small portion of the FAA, flight standards deals with enforcement, investigation, and hearing complaints and doing those types of things. But the way they're organized, and I won't go into a whole lot of detail, but I'll tell you, they have two main safety assurance offices. One is the Office of Air Carrier Safety Assurance, where I worked, and you have another Office of General Aviation Safety Assurance. Now, at the time when I retired back in 21, we had around 68 Part 121 certificates. Gives you an idea. That's your Deltas, these, American Airlines, those types of United. On the General Aviation Safety Assurance side, they had over 7,800 certificates at the time. Now, that's a huge number. They had about double the amount of people, but still, that's just a huge number to try to manage. So let me try to tie all this together. So the FAA looked at, when this was brought up from NATA, the FAA then started looking at that and said, well, how can we then take and really get to the root, to the crux of the matter, where the problem is actually at. And the easiest way they found was to increase the amount of education and awareness about what a illegal charter is. Because there's a lot of, like we were talking about with Part 380, public charter operations, you start getting in these rules and people are like, okay, you're making my head hurt. Just tell me what it is, So one of the things that I think GASA, as we use the term General Aviation Safety Assurance in flight standards, has recognized is that it is better to try to educate and then zoom in on the people who are actually the paying passengers. Because guess what? They're the ones who are going to be able to help prevent this from happening in the future. The more awareness there is and the more they understand it, the better it becomes. Now, with that comes a couple of pieces that the FAA still has to work on, and that we are very excited to try to introduce with the FAA Reauthorization bill in the area around certification. We'll talk about that, but also aircraft registry. These are priorities that the flight standards area has to try to increase their efficiency and effectiveness in those two areas. Specifically, though, if you were to look today and you were a charter, someone who was wanting to purchase a charter flight from point A to point B, and you went in and looked it up online at the FAA.gov site, the main thing you're going to see is an in-number inquiry. Well, okay, so what does that mean? Well, that's like going to the driver motor vehicle or DMV in your state and asking somebody to run a license plate. Okay, on a particular car. It tells you who owns it. It doesn't tell you whether or not that teenage person who is driving it is legal to operate it. Okay, and especially with a carload of other teenagers who may not supposed to have been in that car in the first place. So it's the same context here. There's two different databases or data sources that have to work together to be able to demonstrate whether or not and a particular operation is legal or not. One of those pieces is extremely transparent, is available for anybody in the world to see at any time. They can get it on their smartphone. The other one's on a spreadsheet. Okay, now how many paying passengers do you know that would go out and search through a spreadsheet to see if their particular flight is on that? It's just not going to happen. It has to be something that is easy, that people can pick up their device and be able to see and be able to query. So that's something else that we are very focused on with NATA to try to push into the FAA reauthorization to try to get the FAA to become a bit more, it's not that they're not transparent, it's to be more easy to retrieve, I guess is the best way to use that term. So, Vince, I think that I hopefully answered that question from the perspective you asked it.
Yeah, absolutely. Before I move to something else, David, did you have anything else you wanted to tag on that?
No, I think that's a good description. I will say, if you go to NATA's site and there's an illegal charter page, there's a lot of really good information. There is a link there that you can check, and what Alan was talking about, it'll take you to the FAA site where you can pull up the spreadsheet. So it's there, but it's Alan's point is very well taken. It's not terribly user friendly, but at least to NATA's credit, it's poked the FAA into getting that available. So
yeah,
to any other wireheads out there like me from avionics, that's how I got my start. It makes a lot of sense, but for people that don't like to mess around with wires, it's it's probably not as good.
Yeah.
The military and the aviation language almost slipped out. No,
yes, sir. And a pause there.
So the other elephant in the room, if you will, is that thing that comes around every 5 years called FAA Reauthorization and budget and all of that represents. And I understand that you guys at the summit are going to be addressing that. So do you want to share what you're planning on talking about with that and what that means?
Sure.
From an NATA perspective, et cetera.
Yeah, that's a great segment. Like I said, our VP of Government Affairs, her name is Karen Huggard, and she is extremely active on the Hill, trying to work with the staffers and the people behind the scenes to work language into the bills so that we can get several things of focus of priority that our members have shared with us are their priorities. And so one of those is the area of aircraft certification. Now, that's a big topic. It encompasses so many different things, but let me try to put it into the example I was given earlier about DMV. So if you were to walk into your DMV in your state, in your community, most places have a little number tag that you take and you go sit down, and then when it's your turn, you get up and you go to the desk and you do whatever business it is you have. As you well know, if you've ever tried to title a car from your name to someone else's name, every state's a little different in how they do that, and they want that done a particular way on the title. And so let's say that you went to the DMV, you pulled a number and you sat down and your number gets called. You get up there and that's the transaction that you want to take place, but you don't have the title. Well, you're not going to stay in the queue. You're going to go out, you leave the number, and that number gets pushed off. In flight standards, how this works for new entrant certifications, when they get a number, they keep that number, regardless of if they're ready or not. And so FAA finds themselves doing a lot more educating and hand-holding with applicants who may or may not be as ready as they should. Now, that doesn't keep them from doing all of it, because there are other ways to gain efficiencies and some of those kinds of things. But one of the ways that we are very focused on trying to get into the bill is a way for the FAA to become much more transparent with metrics behind the scenes of how many applicants are in the system, how long is the average time does it take for a Part 135 to go from start to finish, how many months is that, how many days, how many business days. Those kinds of metrics would help measure, and what gets measured gets done. And then it brings the light to something that's been kind of off into its own little corner. So we believe that that is just a way to enhance the FAA's efforts in that. And they already have the data. It's just a matter of presenting it so that everybody can see. So those are just a couple of intro items that we are very focused on to try to get into that. We have others all the way from the aircraft registry, which is something that Flight Standards is very focused on to prevent backlogs there. There's also things called the Pilot Record Database and the efforts that are going on there. So there's several things that tie into that, Vince, but those around certification are two of our biggest priorities at the present time.
Got you. Gentlemen, as we kind of wrap up things here, anything else that you wanted to share about this upcoming summit that you think is important for everybody to know? And we'll encourage everybody to come out. I mean, you guys are going to be putting out a wealth of information from some really great experts. So anything else that we can add to that?
Sure, David. Let me let you have first stab at that, and I'll take it from there if you don't mind.
I just would encourage everybody to go look at the schedule for the proposed summit. I think it's going to be crammed full of some very good, very cutting edge. This is what's going on. That's one of the huge benefits of an organization like NATA. It's so well plugged into what's going on in DC. So I think it's going to be a very productive summit. I certainly hope people can attend.
And what I would like to do from that is encourage everyone that, especially our members who maybe are a little bit reticent about coming and that type of thing. The day before, we're going to go up onto the Hill. We're going to talk to our own representatives. We're going to have those conversations and really talk through what is important to them with their representative. And when they do that, that representative is very cued in because that person is from their state. It's one of their constituents. And we want our members to be able to have that opportunity to share that information. We're also going to have multiple opportunities in the evenings to be able to sit down and talk to other people who are going through some of the similar situations. The next day, when we're going through the summit, what I want people to understand is that we're not there to resolve specific issues and problems. We're there to talk about them, to expand our knowledge of them, to stimulate.
So it's almost like a workshop.
It's exactly what it is. It's to us to be able to share with the members and the members to be able to share with us. And then when we walk away from this, what we should walk away with is a much better understanding of at least some ways to then resolve and really be specific about some of the problems that we have, and then how do we resolve them. Back to you, Ben.
Well said, gentlemen. Jillian, tell us how anybody that's interested can, after hearing about this and everything, register, et cetera, for the summit.
Yeah, of course. You would just need to go to our website, www.nata.aero, select the events tab, and you'll be able to click on the Air Charter Summit. You'll be able to find more details about the conference, the agenda, speakers, sponsorships, and just more information about the venue. And registration is still up and available, and we look forward to seeing you guys there.
Okay. And again, that's on June 21st and 22nd?
Correct.
Absolutely. Gentlemen and Jillian, thank you very much for providing this preview of the upcoming Charter Summit. As I said at the top of the show, it is very timely, probably something that everybody needs to be involved in that are in this industry. So looking forward to that and hope that you guys have a great conference. The one other thing that we're already over time, but I just wanted to say the one other thing is, did you want to add anything else about the advanced air mobility piece? Because that is something that is also about our future and is going to be here before we know it.
Perfect. And thank you for that transition. So as we're talking through all of the current problems and issues and the things that our members are having, and we're listening to the keynote speakers, the theme throughout the day is also going to be, what does that future hold? What is going on in the advanced air mobility world inside the government right now? How is that being tied together? What ways is this going to impact my business? Not necessarily tomorrow exactly, but it's coming within the next 9 months to 18 months, and it'll be here. A lot of this stuff, I used to think, that's not till 2030 something. Folks, it's here. And the way it's going to come about is from these types of conversations happening, and take a look at the future with those people who are actually bringing the items to the table and who have a vested interest in seeing it succeed. So I would very much encourage everyone to listen in for that future piece, to also understand, what can I do to help and bring that into, so that I can also make a little money off of that as well. So Vince, thank you for that.
Absolutely. And couldn't have said it better myself. Couldn't have said it, actually. No, I'm just kidding. Guys, thanks again, Alan, David, Jillian, for doing this and being available to share this about the upcoming summit. Wish you guys the best for the Air Charter Summit coming up in a couple of weeks. It was great having you guys on. We hope that this preview has encouraged you to attend the NATA Air Charter Summit, again, coming up in just 2 weeks on June 21st and 22nd at the Gaylord Resort and Convention Center at National Harbor. Next week, my show will be dedicated to Father's Day. I'll be interviewing some dads and their sons and daughters who are also pilots, and we'll talk about that father-son, father-daughter type of flying routine. All things aviation and aerospace webcast videos are available on Private Air Media YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. It's also available as an audio-only podcast on just about anywhere you get your podcasts, including Apple and Spotify. If you haven't already, I'd ask that you please subscribe. Until next time, take care, be safe flying if you're a pilot, and have a good one. Everybody take care. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vince.